Episode 230, Evolution and Response. This is the World Organic News for the week ending 7th of September 2020. John Moore reporting. Decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Way back in episode 144, I delved into the misunderstandings we have to deal with when the word evolution arises. There's a link to that episode in the show notes. To give you a quick summary though, there's a feral pest in Australia called the cane toad, introduced into the 1930s into the state of Queensland against the advice of the scientists, but in time for an election. The toads were supposed to eat the cane beetles ravaging the sugar industry at the time, and the politicians got re-elected. The toad, however, once introduced, avoided the cane beetles and started chewing through native frogs, toads and reptiles. The toads carry a poison on their back, excreted through glands, and these toads have spread south into northern New South Wales, north through the rest of Queensland and west over into the Northern Territory. Now things are a bit different in the NT, not just with the cane toads but with people themselves, but that's a whole other podcast. In the Territory there's a change in the population profile of the areas where the toads have been. Snake populations are now full of small-mouthed individuals. And the media says things like, the snakes have evolved smaller mouths so they can't bite the toads and be poisoned. However, what actually happened was this. The standard and larger sized individuals in the populations of snakes died out when they bit the toads. The members of the population with smaller mouths weren't able to bite the toads, so they lived long enough to reproduce other small-mouthed individuals. Over time, the population became dominated by these small-mouthed snakes. So basically there's a pressure in an environment and that leads to a change in the population profile. If you see a change in a population profile, you can generally track back to find the change that caused it. Another example of this is the wonder product glyphosate. Now, regular listeners will spot the derision in that last sentence. So the sales pitch from Monsanto went like this. Grow our Monsanto-developed GM, genetically modified, corn, soy, cotton, which is resistant to glyphosate in the form of Roundup. Spray the crud out of your paddocks and everything that isn't the GM crop will be destroyed. This meant weeds, but got the soil biology as well. Just like the cane toads hitting a new population of snakes, most were wiped out, but some, a tiny fraction to begin with, weren't. Over time, these seeds continued to grow and reproduce until we have the horror of glyphosate-resistant weeds. And you will appreciate I'm looking at this from the industrial agriculture point of view. As regenerators, we know a weed is just another surface for photosynthesis and a possible fungal connection node underground. And fungus brings us to our latest example of evolution at work, and it is perhaps even more troubling. We need to go back about 65 million years to follow the changes going on in this example. One day, a Tuesday I believe, a meteor struck the Earth around the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. This had well-documented effects. All the non-avian dinosaurs bundied off fairly quickly. The avians, that is the birds, and we mammals survived. And the Earth was a fairly unpleasant place for a while. Well, quite a while. Dark, cold and full of rotting dinosaur flesh and decomposing plant matter, which is just the ideal environment for fungi. Now, fungal infections today are very unpleasant. Birds, like mammals, are warm-blooded, and so our normal body temperatures are such that fungal spores cannot survive in warm-blooded animals as a rule. The heat kills them off a little below our 37 degrees C or 98.6 degrees F, and I think the average for birds is about 105 F, so they're okay. Now suppose we are entering a geological period of rising ambient temperatures, like we are now. Around the world we are seeing increased incidences of heat waves. This means across a wide geographical area, all of the biosphere is subjected to a new stress, a change in conditions. This change will favour some individuals in a population and not others. So the one kingdom that seems to have been changing under these conditions is the fungi. Remember, fungi are neither plants nor animals, more closely related to animals it turns out, but they are a separate kingdom. Now, yeasts are a single cell fungi, have great uses, bread, beer, etc. However, anyone who's had a yeast infection will know they aren't pleasant. Equally, anyone who's begun a COVID isolation sourdough starter should be amazed at the amount of yeast floating around in the air. On the whole, our body temperature deals with the majority of yeast infections, so we don't even know about them. We're just too hot for the yeast to become established. Now, as the temperature has been pulsing upward with heat waves over the past, say, 40 years, we have been providing the exact conditions required to select for higher temperature surviving yeasts, and these appear to have taken hold in some hospitals around the world. And yes, they are deadly. Even the normal defence of a fever to raise our body temperature and kill these things off isn't effective. And in much the same way that encroaching upon wilderness is releasing new viruses into the human population, Ebola, SARS, MERS, SARS-CoV-2, etc., we are also creating the conditions for fungal-based pandemics through our inaction on climate change and loss of biodiversity. This alone should be reason enough to take climate change seriously. I'd have thought disruption of the carbon and water cycle should be too, but they're a little bit more abstract for most people. Rampant yeast infections should be, however, something that people can relate to. Given time, populations either have a sufficient number of individuals capable of dealing with a new condition and environment, or they go extinct. Now, we are in self-made change conditions, and we're responsible for it. We can unmake it if we choose, and have the will to effect the change. Now is the time, wherever you are is the place. I would suggest growing your own food. This has so many climate positive effects. It immediately sucks the food mile fossil fuel component out of your meals. It more than likely rips the energy component of fertilisers from that meal too, on the assumption that you'll be growing regeneratively, and I've just created a new word, no diggly, and with minimal external inputs. Food is our key to starting the process of allowing nature to reset itself at a safer for humans levels. If not now, then when? And by happy coincidence, there's a link to a Udemy course in the show notes entitled Growing a No-Dig Garden, if you'd like some assistance. And a big thank you to those who have taken the course. It's very gratifying to see people gaining some knowledge from it. And the feedback has been helpful too. Remember, decarbonise the air, recarbonise the soil. Thank you all for listening, and I'll be back next week.